right, hello everyone. I'm gonna get rolling here, 2 minutes after the hour. Hi everyone, I'm Natty Zola. I'm a partner at Matchstick Ventures, and you are at the Doing More of the Right Things Faster workshop or talk. I really love this one. I've given this talk many times in Techstars. I used to run the Techstars Accelerator in Boulder, and I've just found that it's a really nice way to get companies to start building a more repeatable cadence into their process so that they get more of the right things done faster. So I'm going to go through probably maybe 15 to 20 minutes worth of a talk here and some slides that go along with it with visual aids. And I'm happy to do Q&A throughout or do Q&A at the end. So feel free to add questions in the chat, or you can, I'm not really sure where the button is, but you can join and ask a question live. It's always nice to see people's faces, so feel free to do that as well. So without further ado here, I'm going to go through some slides and kick off the presentation. Sorry, I'm using the format where you can see I'm not in full screen mode because I just have my laptop here today. It's a little hard to do that and go back and forth, but should still work fine. So to kick things off here, one of my mentors and favorite investors is Fred Wilson, and he has this great quote which says, "The best companies I work with have a heartbeat. They operate on a pace and a cadence and a rhythm that is perceptible to everyone in and around the company." And every time Fred Wilson says something, I follow it very closely. He's an amazing entrepreneur, an amazing investor. And I've just seen this really play out in my career, both as a founder. So I started a company and scaled it through an exit, and as an investor, where I've now invested in over 100 companies. And I think one of the things that separates the top performers from the middle or bottom performers is this heartbeat or cadence or pace or rhythm, whatever you want to call it, that the entrepreneurs create in their company to make sure that they're focused on the right things and doing them faster. So most companies, I'm sure this is your case, is you're at some point today and you have some next major milestone down the road and you want to get there. Usually when you start out today, it looks like somewhat of a straight path to get there. But as we all know, this is sort of what tends to happen is you start on your journey and somewhere along the line, you kind of get off the straight path towards it. Maybe you moved back towards it a little closer, and then you kind of like bouncing around and maybe you spiral and maybe you don't even realize that this is what's happening until too long, but you don't ever actually end up reaching that milestone or you get off track. And so the goal today is to use cadence or your rhythm or your heartbeat, which I'll call cadence throughout the rest of this presentation, to prevent this. And what we really want to see is a path a little bit more like this, which is, obviously it's not straight along the line of, the most direct route to that major milestone, but at least is somewhat close to it and you end up getting there. And so the way that we do this is through focusing on the cadence within the company and that drumbeat. So what that can actually look like, and I'm going to go through different practical steps around this, but let's say that milestone is about a quarter out. Well, you want to have as a monthly cadence, which creates some guardrails around knowing where you're at any moment in time and where you need to focus to get to that goal. You're going to add in a weekly cadence and then layer on top of that a daily cadence. And so this is the heartbeat or rhythm that happens within a company or really any organization to get from where you want to be today to your next major milestone. And without having these processes or cadence in your company, you end up on that kind of like, hopefully we get their path. Maybe we're going to double back and spiral out of control and sort of corkscrew our way to some unknown destination. And what I'm going to talk through next is what are some practical tips or what does this look like in a startup to make sure that you do create that cadence or guardrails that help you stay on track to meet those milestones. At the end of the day, what that's going to deliver is you're going to do more of the right things faster towards that milestone. What we're going to focus on here is what I call minimum effective cadence. So I think one of the things to be careful of is if you're a startup, one of the main reasons why you win or you're successful is that you don't act like a big company. And the way big companies act is they have a lot of bureaucracy, they have a lot of overhead, they have a lot of process, and you don't want to overcorrect on this. Like you want to be nimble and agile, but you do need some sort of like minimum effective cadence. And what I've seen that deliver for startups is you end up integrating a lot of concepts in your team much better. You end up more focused. There's a lot more alignment within the company. People know how to work and what to work on. There's a lot more speed that comes from this. You actually enable a lot more autonomy for your teams. They can go off and do their work and get it done. And then overall, you see a lot more energy in a company when you have this drumbeat or cadence throughout. So let's start with monthly cadence. We're going to start with those sort of like big guardrails that were sort of this like yellowish color. So what I'm going to go through here is what I recommend as that minimum effective cadence. And we're going to go through both monthly, weekly, and daily, and then see, well, how much time during a week is this actually taking, so that you realize, oh, wow, I don't need to spend that much time strategizing or staying focused to then deliver results. So on a monthly level, what I recommend is a monthly strategy meeting. And this tends to be about 2 hours a month. And in that, you follow the following, or you cover the following areas. You review any major milestone, or review the major milestone that you're going after, just to make sure, hey, has that destination shifted at all based on the learnings we've had this time period or this month? You're going to review the prior month's OKR, or the objective for the prior month, and get from that, what are the key learnings? And then you're going to have a little conversation that I call confront the brutal facts. This is something I learned from working with Jim Collins. And what that is like, let's take a very sober, like non in the reality distortion field view of what's going on in our company, and what might we need to change, or what might we have learned that needs to shift our priorities, or potentially that major milestone. Super important to have these conversations at least monthly within your company, because you don't want to deceive yourself that you are really on the right track when you're not. So this tends to take about 2 hours. I like to carve out time, don't rush it. And you can build a little bit of a cadence here. You can see in this photo, 2 founders that I worked with, they basically would detail out everything that they had done over the past month, review the key learnings from it on sticky notes. Really nice tactile way of incorporating those learnings. The other thing that you do in this meeting is you set a new monthly OKR, or a new monthly focus area. OKR stands for objective and key result. And if you don't know much about OKRs, I did a talk on OKRs earlier today, which you can find that recording, or you can email me. I'll put my email in the chat and I can send you details on that. So you do want to set a new monthly OKR, which is like, what's the goal for the next month, which is, where we're trying to get to as an interim step towards that bigger goal. The image on the left side here is just sort of like a screenshot of a Google Sheet that I've used with companies that sort of help them track that process of getting to their monthly goal and what it might look like on a week-by-week basis. But really, this is it. This is your 2-hour strategy meeting every month, where you're reviewing the major milestone that you're going to, review your last month's goal. What did you learn last month? Confront any new brutal facts, and let's set a new monthly OKR. 2 hours, and you should be well aligned. So let's look next at the weekly cadence. This is sort of this like orange color, which we'll see, if I go back here to this, you can kind of see like, here was the monthly cadence that we were working on. You can see the sort of like bigger V shapes. Now we're working on those like smaller oranger ones, which is the weekly cadence. So on a weekly cadence, there's a little bit more going on. What I recommend is a 1-hour weekly planning. This typically happens on Monday morning. And the agenda I like for this meeting is you start with good news and gratitudes. So it sort of sets the week off on a good tone and builds some, just sort of like healthy connection time into the meeting. You want to review your prior week's objective and key result. What did you learn from that prior week? You set a new weekly OKR. So what's like the most important thing we need to get done this week towards that monthly goal? And then you go around the table and figure out, what are we blocking each other on, or how can we unblock anything that's sort of like stuck that we need to get done. So this tends to take about an hour. And after that, everyone should know kind of like what's their goal. Everyone should have some sort of tasks or to-dos that are aligned towards that weekly objective. And if you want, you can even go in here and start to write out the stories or the individual work tasks that need to be done by person to get to that weekly objective. The image sort of on the left half of this is a screenshot from a little sheet that I've made for companies where they can write down all of this stuff in one place. And then this chart area, they'll track their progress towards that weekly OKR on a daily basis. Really cool way of doing it. And I can share that with anyone on this call if they would like it afterwards. The next thing that I recommend that companies do on a weekly cadence is a retrospective. This is a time to look back and learn over the prior week and a time to build connection within the team. So this tends to be on a Friday afternoon, and there are 3 prompting questions that you work through. And you basically spend, the 3 prompting questions are, I liked, I wished, and what if? And practically the way you do this is you spend about 2 minutes with each person having a sticky notepad and a Sharpie, and they write down all the things they liked from the past week. Could be literally stuff in their personal life, stuff they liked at work. Like your goal is to just get out all of these things. And then one by one, you go up and you share all of those things on a wall under a heading, I liked. Obviously, you can do this on like a Miro board or something like that, digital if you're not in person. Then you switch to I wished. So what are you things that you wished were different or were better or were, I don't know, easier, harder from the prior week? And that tends to surface things that are good opportunities for improvement. And you spend about 2 minutes of quiet reflection where each person is writing 1 per sticky note, and then you take turns putting them up on the board. Then you go and you answer the prompting question, what if? The cool thing about what if is in that prompting question, you think about if time, resources, money, the laws of physics, family dynamics, if none of these constraints existed, like what could we do? It tends to be backward looking, forward looking, and it's just a time to brainstorm. And you end up getting some like really interesting and good ideas out of that that are just like fun to share. And so what happens, and again, you spend 2 minutes writing these down individually as sticky notes, and then you share them on the wall together. And then at the end of all that, what I tend to do is you take a Sharpie and you circle 2 or 3 or pull 2 or 3 sticky notes off the wall that are things that you actually want to carry forward with you and either incorporate in your to-do list for next week, or maybe some things you want to change around how you're doing work. This retrospective is so powerful to get people to share learnings and to get on the same page and to sort of like clear the air around stuff. And if you have a cadence of doing this every week, what you don't have are these great insights not ever getting shared, or someone bottling up something that's bothering them, and then it's sort of exploding because they haven't had a way to express it over a month or 2 months or a quarter or whatever. Love the retrospectives and highly recommend them. And then the third piece that I encourage startups to allocate time to every week is their weekly update. So this is an email that goes out to their stakeholders. So this could be investors, friends and family, key advisors, key mentors, where you're sort of recapping like what's happening in the company. This is as much for them as it is for you as the leaders, where you want to capture and record like, okay, like let me take an hour and just like articulate everything that's happening in the company. Like you should be moving fast enough that there's like relatively interesting stuff happening every single week in the company. One way to frame up this email I have in here is you have a one-liner of what you do. You have a too long didn't read summary at the top, which are kind of your bullet points. Below that, you have any asks for help. You share good news, you share challenges, you share your KPIs. And then it's nice to put something fun at the end that might be related to your company. For example, we had an ed tech company that I worked with and invested in. And at the bottom of every weekly email, they would put a really fun, cute video of some kid doing something silly and learning. So it's kind of like a reward for reading through it. I really think this is important. Certainly if you're going at the early stages and you're starting to work with investors, this update is going to keep them thinking about you, and you're going to get a chance to show your progress and your trajectory through this and get some leverage on it because it's going to a lot of people. You may move this to be monthly over time as you start scaling, but I think at the earliest stages, it's good to do this weekly and build this habit. I've had so many companies who have said the most successful thing for them in raising money was that they were really disciplined about this weekly update, and investors got to know them and see how they were performing, and it made it much easier to fundraise. So highly recommend that. So this ends up being about 3 hours a week of work sort of on the company versus work in the company. Now we're going to talk about daily cadence. So, when I go back to this image here, right, we've talked about these sort of like bigger, lighter yellow ways of keeping on track. We've talked about these sort of like oranger weekly ones. This is like the kind of redder, on a daily basis, like what work are we doing and how are we staying aligned to make sure we're working towards our goal. So the daily cadence, what I recommend is a stand-up for 15 minutes. And the stand-up is everyone on either a leadership team, especially if you're a startup. If you're scaling and you're beyond a startup and you have different departments, you might have like a leadership stand-up for 15 minutes, and then you'll have a departmental stand-up for 15 minutes. So that might expand the time on this. But really what you do is you review your work board or whatever tool you're using to manage your to-dos. I'm partial to a Kanban style work board. I like the physical one if you're all in the same place, like it's shown here, but you can also do this on Trello or something like that. But however you're managing your work, if that's in Jira or in product board or Pivotal Tracker or whatever it is, whatever you're doing, wherever you're doing your work and you're visualizing it, review that, make sure everyone's aligned around, hey, this is the work that needs to be going on today. Then you can do a little red, yellow, green. I talked about this in a prior session around building a company from the inside out, which you can go watch the recording, or I can send you the presentation. This is really around like checking in, like, how's everyone doing today? And you kind of go around the circle and everyone says, are they green? Like I'm here, I'm present, I have good energy, I'm not really distracted by things outside of work. Maybe I'm yellow where, yeah, there's something going on in my world that's kind of distracting me, and you can choose to share it or not. Or red, I'm here, but I'm really not here. I have something significant going on in my life that's just sort of like preventing me from being present. And that could be a work thing, it could be a personal thing. And you kind of go around the circle, and then you have context around how anyone is showing up on that given day. And so maybe your colleague is checking in red. Maybe you don't, go badger them so hard for something that they're behind on, or maybe you go and you see that they're really having a tough day and you encourage them to leave early or something like that, just because you have some context around how they're doing. And then the last thing that you do in a stand-up is clear any blockers. So maybe you're waiting on something from someone and they didn't realize it. And so you need to just like hash that out really quickly and make sure they know that they're waiting on it or you're waiting on it. And just make sure that there's, you're trying to move all of your work product to done as quickly as possible. This tends to take about 15 minutes. If there's a topic that comes up that needs more discussion, I could say you move it to the 16th minute, meaning everyone else can leave and two people can spend some more time discussing it, but you don't really discuss that in the stand-up because that's taking up other people's valuable time. But you could have some time to discuss something that maybe you need some clarity on, and you do that right after the stand-up. I want to zoom in here on a work board just to show you an example of a really effective Kanban board that I've seen people do. So the way that these boards work is they actually work right to left, which is a little counterintuitive. And you're basically like moving work from the left side to the right side. Done means, hey, we've delivered value to customer, it's shipped, or it's like fully completed. And then you're moving stuff from like you have sort of a backlog in this case, which is next stuff you're gonna do next week. You have what are your goals for this week? This one I have broken down between the objective and OKR work for this week and just like other tasks that come up. Then what are we working on today? You'll see that column. You'll see a doing column. So that's what people are working on that exact moment. Stuff that's in the pen. This is stuff that people can't move forward because they're waiting on something from someone else, and then done. And your job or your goal is to move everything that's in this week through today into doing and then into done. What's nice is at the end of the week, you can look back and see like, well, what did we not get done? Why didn't we get that done? It gives you like a nice analysis of it. So this is sort of a standard Kanban style workflow that works really well. So if you don't have a workflow process, I recommend starting here because I think it's sort of like the easiest, minimum effective cadence to get productive. You may ask, sometimes people ask, well, what are the colors of the sticky notes? You can either have like different people have different color sticky notes so you can visualize your work. What we tended to do with this is we actually just, whatever sticky note pile we grabbed, we put up there. And then you would actually put your initials on any sticky notes that you were doing, which is a little bit like visually complicated because you're like, well, but it was amazing. I kind of learned to ignore the color and just look for my initials on stuff. So what I want now, if we sort of like zoom back out here and we're like, okay, so what does all this like minimum effective cadence look like in our day? So if you think about it from a monthly perspective, you have 2 hours of the monthly strategy meeting, plus each week, sort of the orange here, you have a weekly planning, a weekly retrospective, and you're sending your weekly update. So that's about 3 hours. And then you have 15-minute daily stand-up 5 days a week. This basically adds up to minimum effective cadence, which is about 19 hours a month. And that, if you're working, I think I have the math in here, about 50 hours a week, which is probably like at least what people are working at a startup. This ends up being about 9% of your time. And so are you willing to take 9% of your time to make sure that you are aligned as a team, you have great energy, you have great focus, you have great autonomy? It's a very simple trade-off in my world to be organized And if you're really structured with this, it's literally 9% of your time. And then the rest of your time, you're working in the company and making progress. So this is sort of like the minimum effective cadence that I recommend. My bet is that most companies are actually spending more time than this. They're just not tracking it or not aware of it because it's happening ad hoc within the company. So, my pitch here is it worth spending 9% of your time to turn this into this? I think we would all sign up for that. And for some of you, that might be actually less time working on the company, that 9% of your time. For some of you, that might be slightly more, but I think the trade-off is definitely worth it. And so what that ends up looking like here is you have that monthly cadence, which is providing these like bigger term guardrails. You have your weekly cadence, which is, on a shorter time frame, making sure you're working on the right things. And then how are you aligning as a team and working on a daily level? You can also zoom a little bit further out and figure out like, well, what should I do on a quarterly cadence? I tend to think startups should be working on a monthly cadence or shorter, just because you're learning so much and your business is changing rapidly. But what I do recommend is on a quarterly cadence that your leadership team do something like a retreat or a offsite. This can be anywhere from 1 to 3 days. 3 days may be a little bit more extreme. Maybe that's like an annual retreat, maybe 1 day. And what you're doing really there is you're sort of reviewing the mission, reviewing your values, reviewing your KPIs in your business. You're, again, confronting any brutal facts, like, do we need to pivot? Do we need to persevere? Like, what's going on? And you're really also using this time to bond and have some fun and sort of like check in with each other as co-founders. And I think that's a really important piece of the cadence. For what it's worth, like in the fund and in Matchstick, Ryan and I do this as well. So we find time quarterly to sync up sort of outside of work because we're just so focused and busy all the time. We need that time to zoom out and connect. So, cadence overall enables this. If you want to get to your next major milestone faster, better, without waste, you really have to find what's that minimum effective cadence for you and your organization. So that was it. Thank you. I'm Natty at matchstickventures.com. I'm happy to answer questions. It doesn't look like we had any questions come up during the session here, but yeah, I'm curious, what questions do you all have? While you're thinking of your questions, I'm just putting my email in the chat here. I know you can see it on the screen, but you could just copy it from over there. Happy to send you all the slides if this is helpful and you want a refresher, or you want to run this by your team and see what they think about it, or figure out what's going to be your sort of minimum effective cadence as well. Cool, Rahul, thanks for being here, and happy to send you the slides. Yeah, I'm curious, what questions do you guys have? Do you have any thoughts around cadence? I'm also curious and would love to learn from you. Like, is there something that works really well for you and your team? I'd be excited to hear about that. Also kind of curious to hear if you've had scenarios where either your like cadence really harmed or helped the company. This is like, I basically have now worked with 100+ companies, and this I feel like has been the most consistent, my recommendation for the most consistent, where companies are like, well, just tell me what to do in terms of like cadence. I just want to do it so I can, help me learn from your years of experience, and like, this is what you should do. And then you can start customizing it for your own needs. Maybe you add in a meeting, maybe you take out a meeting, maybe you change the agenda for the monthly strategy session, or whatever it may be. All right, what questions do y'all have? Hey, Andy, thanks for the question. Curious if you can elaborate on the effectiveness of this approach for different stage companies. Cool. Yeah, this it's amazing. This actually has worked for companies that have scaled to, through Series B, I've seen this work. So this is not just, this works great for early stage startups, but I've seen it work really well through Series B. There are a few tweaks that you might make. So I'll go through a few of those tweaks as you start scaling. This certainly works for seed stage companies. The main tweak that I see is, I'm just going to go up here, is more in this like monthly cadence here. And the monthly and weekly cadence, basically what I see is you end up having a little bit of like stacked layers. So you might have a monthly strategy meeting that's for like the whole leadership team. And then you're going to have a monthly strategy session within your department. So let's say you're the CMO of a company and you now have 100 employees. There should be a monthly strategy meeting that's all of the C-suite or the executives, and you're kind of setting like the overall objectives for that month or for the next major milestone, then the CMO and the marketing team is going to have a monthly strategy meeting with their team to figure out, okay, what work are we going to do in service of that overall goal that the company is setting? And so as a leader, you may double up on the monthly strategy meeting. And then you also might double up on the weekly meetings where you have a weekly strategy meeting or a weekly retrospective for the whole C-suite or leadership meeting. And then you're also going to have a weekly meeting for your department and a weekly retrospective for your department. So I think as you scale, the leaders in the company may end up doubling the amount of cadence in here, but I think that's sort of the inevitability of staying in sync with the broader organizational goals and sort of the leadership team as well as your team. The other thing that I do see is for healthy teams, there's the organization is sort of setting high level priorities, but they're not setting the actual to-dos of the departments. The departments are coming up with the to-dos that are in service of that overall company vision in their meetings, and then bringing those to that meeting that all of the functional departments are at, and just making sure that there's alignment in there. And then the leaders need to figure out in that sort of overall leadership meeting, they need to clear blockers across different parts of the organization. For instance, common blockers might be product is waiting on engineering to deliver something, or sales is waiting to sell something until engineering delivers it. So what's nice is that you have those integrating meetings across the functional departments at the highest level, and you have the cadence to be able to do that, to clear those blockers, and then those end up percolating down through the organization. And the issues in the organization end up coming up because everyone is communicating really well to each other. The other thing that I've seen work really well is that you can add one meeting here, which is what I call an ops review. And each functional department, so marketing, sales, engineering, customer support, whatever you have, will have 3 minutes to sort of detail what did they basically do the let me go to the slide here. They do this weekly planning meeting. They basically summarize this in 3 or 4 slides, and they actually present it one department after another to the whole organization, so everyone knows what each other is working on. And that's so powerful because all of a sudden you have these sales understands what engineering's doing, engineering understands what sales is doing, and there's a lot more empathy across the organization because they know what each other's goals are and what they're working on. And you end up surfacing things where sales is oh, I totally misunderstood what this product feature was when it's actually presented to them. So that meeting is really effective as well. And so if any companies or anyone on the call wants to sort of geek out on how do you do this as a scaling organization, I'm happy to go into more detail with you one-on-one on it. But yeah, overall, it works really well. You just end up sort of tweaking the meetings, and maybe you need to add 1 or 2 in, but I would really still stay pretty snapped to this type of cadence. Thank you, Andy, for that question. All right, what other questions do you all have? Jerry has a question here. For the monthly cadence, you used OKR as singular. Does that mean there should only be one? Yeah, there's a lot of sort of debate around this. I'm just gonna go to that slide here. So I'll probably stay on this one. I tend to think it's better to have one overall objective. This is the most important thing we need to do as a company over this time period. You may have secondary objectives, but I think it's really helpful to sort of force yourself, if we're going to only get one thing really right this time period, what's that one thing going to be? And then everyone knows, okay, if I have to make a trade-off on what to work on, this is the one thing we just have to get right. And then if you've done all the work you can on that OKR, and maybe you're waiting on someone else, then you start working on secondary goals. So a secondary OKR or a third OKR. So I'm okay with companies setting those, but I think it should be really clear that the main OKRs is the priority, and we're going to try to do everything we can to make that happen. And so, yeah, I just think and I also recognize that you can't. That may not always be the case. So I think that's what you're going for. And it is, if there's a month where you have 2 OKRs and they're they have even priority, you just manage that. It's not about being perfect here. It's more about having the process and having the conversations. So it's okay if there are more than one, but I would say it's better to have just one. One thing that can be powerful when you have just one also is you may realize, wow, this is the most important thing in the organization, but there might be one person or one function that doesn't feel like they can contribute to that one goal because of their skill set. And what's great about that is that then sparks a conversation where you can say, okay, you're right. There's no work for, I'm going to make it up here, product to help us get towards this objective. Why don't we actually like ask the product people to go outside their comfort zone and do something else for the company? Like maybe it's like, we have to hit our sales number. We have to add $100,000 of sales this month. And so what you end up doing, and I know this sounds like kind of crazy, but if product can't contribute to that, like let's get product doing some prospecting. Let's get product working on the pipeline. Let's get product working on some sales collateral. Like it actually forces a little bit more, instead of being siloed in different functions where you're like, I can't do anything on this objective, I'll go work on something else. It like forces everyone in the organization to figure out like, how can I contribute to that one goal if that's the most important thing? And it gets people to stretch and do different roles, and you're more likely to then achieve it, which is kind of a fun side benefit. I mean, obviously you want to be a little bit careful, if you have someone who really is not capable of doing something, like you don't want to put them in a position of that. But I think you'd be surprised at how much people who are maybe not directly related to an OKR can still really contribute to it. That also builds great team camaraderie, right? There's no more fun moment in a startup when you're all like really rowing the boat together, going after the same thing, and everyone's kind of like picking up things that they didn't think they could do and delivering it. Like that's just amazing. Jerry and Andy, I hope that my answers to your two questions were helpful. And if not, and you have a follow-up question, feel free to throw it in the chat here. I like long, awkward pauses here in case anyone gets a question. You'd be surprised how often someone has a question about, if you wait 10 seconds, it's usually at 8 or 9 or 10 seconds that someone has a question. I'll wait a few more seconds here in case we can surface other questions that you have. All right, seems like maybe that's it. Want to thank you all for being here. And oh, great, Jerry has a question. Have you seen companies operate on a midweek to midweek rather than Monday to Friday cadence? Yes, I have. I think Monday to Friday is actually not necessarily the most optimal cadence. I have totally seen that. I think it totally works. The key is that you need everyone in the org to be on the same cadence. Obviously, if those are sort of offset, you end up having some integration issues. I think there was one other learning that I had. I can't remember it anymore, Jerry, but yes, I have seen companies do that, and it's worked well. I'm also remembering there was one company had one problem with not doing. Actually, in one of the Techstars programs I ran, I actually experimented with this, and I tried to run not a like Monday to Sunday week, and we did like a Thursday to Wednesday week, and there was some problem with it, but I can't remember it now, unfortunately. I don't think that was like a endemic problem with not being able to do that. It was some problem with the structure of the accelerator when I was running it that made it tough. But yes, you can absolutely do this. Not Monday to Friday. It's just about figuring out like what works for you and your team.